My name is Maddie. I'm 31 years old and I live in Seattle now. But this story doesn't begin here. It begins in Portland, in a small apartment with creaky floors and a view of the harbor that always looked better in the rain. That's where I spent most of my 20s working, surviving, and trying to convince myself that being invisible was the same as being strong. I'm not the kind of person who usually talks about myself. I've spent most of my life in the background, quiet, reliable, the one who shows up early, stays late, and never asks for credit. I work in finance. Numbers make sense to me. They don't judge. They don't compare. They don't ask why you're not more like your sister. And that's where this story really begins with my sister. Her name is Vanessa. She's 3 years older than me, and if you ask anyone in my family, she's the blueprint for success. Tall, confident, a lawyer with a house in the suburbs, and a golden retriever named Scout. She's the kind of person who walks into a room and makes everyone turn their head. I'm the kind of person who slips in quietly and hopes no one notices. Growing up, Vanessa was always the star. She won debate competitions, gave speeches at school assemblies, and had her college acceptance letter framed on the living room wall. I liked math. I liked silence. I liked building things with my hands and solving problems no one else wanted to touch. But in my family, that wasn't enough. In my family, being good at spreadsheets didn't earn applause. Every Friday night, I'd drive out to my parents' house for dinner. It was a tradition, no, more like a commandment. My mother would call me 3 times if I said I was tired. My father would send guilt-laced texts like, "This family has a seat for you. Don't leave it empty." So I went, week after week. I sat at the same long wooden table across from Vanessa, beside my mother's casserole dish, under the weight of expectations I never agreed to carry. The conversations were always the same. Vanessa's latest case, Vanessa's new kitchen renovation, Vanessa's vacation plans. My parents would beam with pride, their voices warm and full of admiration. And I'd sit there, nodding, smiling, swallowing bites of food that tasted like silence. No one ever asked about my job. No one ever asked how I was doing. I could have told them about the promotion I got, the late nights I spent fixing broken budgets, the clients who trusted me with millions of dollars. But I didn't, because I knew it wouldn't matter. In their eyes, I was the quiet one, the sensitive one, the shadow behind Vanessa's spotlight. And maybe I could have lived with that. Maybe I could have kept showing up, kept pretending, kept shrinking myself to fit the space they allowed me. But then one night, my mother looked me in the eye and said, "You're not even half the woman your sister is." That sentence didn't just hurt. It cracked something open inside me. Something I'd been holding together for years with duct tape and denial. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that for 3 years, I had been quietly sending money to help them pay the mortgage on that house. The house where they hosted dinners. The house where they praised Vanessa. The house they almost lost after my father's business collapsed during the pandemic. I gave up vacations. I postponed grad school. I stayed in a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a broken heater because I couldn't afford to move. All so they could keep their home. Also, Vanessa could keep hosting dinner parties in a house I was secretly paying for. And still, I wasn't enough. That night, I pushed my chair back, looked my mother in the eye, and said, "Then let her pay the rent for you." The room went silent. My father turned pale. Vanessa blinked, confused. And I, after years of swallowing my voice, finally let it out. This story isn't about revenge. It's not about bitterness. It's about truth. It's about what happens when a woman who's been invisible for too long decides to be seen. It's about me, Maddie, the daughter who paid the bills, the sister who stayed in the shadows, the woman who finally said, "I'm done." And if you've ever felt like you were living someone else's life, if you've ever been compared, overlooked, or quietly erased, then maybe this story is yours too. So let me tell you what happened. All of it. From the beginning. When I look back on my childhood, it feels like there were always 2 stages in our house, the spotlight and the shadows. My sister Vanessa lived in the spotlight. I lived in the shadows. And the strange thing is, I didn't even realize how deeply that division had shaped me until much later in life. Vanessa was born 3 years before me, and from the very beginning, she was the child everyone noticed. She was tall for her age, with a voice that carried across a room, and a confidence that made adults laugh and nod approvingly. She was the kind of kid who could memorize a poem in an afternoon and recite it at dinner like she was performing on stage. My parents would clap, my grandparents would beam, and relatives would say things like, "She's destined for great things." And then there was me, quiet, reserved. I liked puzzles, numbers, and books. I could spend hours building Lego structures or solving math problems, but those things didn't draw applause. At family gatherings, when Vanessa was showing off her debate trophies or singing in the school choir, I'd be sitting in the corner with a notebook, doodling equations or sketching out imaginary floor plans for houses I thought I might build one day. If someone noticed me at all, it was usually with a comment like, "Maddie's shy, sensitive, she'll grow out of it." But I didn't grow out of it. I grew into it. And in my family's eyes, that meant I was always the other daughter, the one who wasn't quite enough. The comparisons started small. When I brought home an A+ in math, my parents would smile politely and then say, "That's nice, Maddie. Did you hear Vanessa won another debate?" When I got into college on my own merit, after working part-time jobs to pay tuition, my mother said, "That's good, but Vanessa got a full scholarship. Isn't that wonderful?" Every achievement of mine was measured against hers, and every time I came up short. By the time we were adults, the pattern was so ingrained that I barely noticed it anymore. At Friday dinners, the conversation always revolved around Vanessa, her law firm, her new house, her plans for a vacation in Europe. My father's voice would swell with pride as he said things like, "She's worked so hard. She deserves everything she has." My mother would nod, adding, "She makes us proud every single day." And me? I would sit there, pushing food around my plate, swallowing each bite with a bitterness I never let show. I had a steady job. I had been financially independent since I was 17. I had even quietly helped my parents through their darkest financial struggles. But none of that mattered. To them, I was just Maddie, the quiet one, the shadow. The worst part wasn't even the lack of recognition. It was the way they made me feel like my life was somehow less valuable because it wasn't as visible. Vanessa's successes were celebrated because they were public, easy to point to, easy to brag about. My sacrifices were invisible, hidden in bank transfers and long nights at the office, and so they didn't count. I remember one dinner in particular, a few months before everything exploded. Vanessa had just bought a new house, and my parents couldn't stop talking about it. My father described the kitchen in detail, as if he had designed it himself. My mother gushed about the neighborhood, the schools, the garden. They spoke about it for nearly an hour, their voices full of pride, their eyes shining. And then my mother turned to me and said, "Maddie, when are you going to buy a house? You're not getting any younger." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I could have bought a house already if I hadn't been secretly paying their mortgage for 3 years. I wanted to tell her that every time I looked at my dwindling savings account, I thought about the apartment I could have owned by now. But instead, I just smiled weakly and said, "Maybe someday." Because that's what I always did. I swallowed my truth so they could keep their illusion. Vanessa, of course, sat there with her triumphant smile, basking in the glow of their admiration. She wasn't cruel, not exactly. But she never once spoke up for me. Never once said, "Maddie works hard too. Maddie deserves recognition." She just let the comparisons hang in the air, like a crown she wore proudly while I stood beside her, bareheaded. And the thing is, I don't think my parents even realized how much damage they were doing. To them, it was natural to praise Vanessa. She was the visible success story, the daughter they could show off to the world. I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need praise because I would keep showing up anyway. They thought I was strong enough to handle being overlooked. They thought wrong. By the time I turned 30, the comparisons had become a kind of background noise in my life. I barely reacted anymore. I would sit at that long wooden table, listening to them talk about Vanessa's latest achievement, and I would nod, smile, and sip my wine. But inside, I was crumbling. Inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was asking myself the same question over and over. What about me? When will I ever be enough? That's why, when my mother finally said those words, "You're not even half the woman your sister is," something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the insult. It was the years of silence, the years of being invisible, the years of giving everything and receiving nothing. It was the weight of every comparison, every dismissal, every time I had been told, directly or indirectly, that I was less. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Friday dinners had always been heavy, but that night felt different from the moment I walked through the door. The air in the house was thick, almost suffocating, as if it already knew what was about to happen. My mother's voice floated from the kitchen, sharp and commanding, while my father sat in the living room with the television on low, pretending to be relaxed but glancing at the clock every few minutes. Vanessa was already there, of course, sitting at the table with her perfect posture, her hair styled just so, her smile polished like glass. I slipped into my usual seat, the one at the far end of the table, half in shadow. The food was laid out beautifully: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, a bottle of red wine breathing in the center. It looked like a celebration, but I knew better. These dinners weren't about food. They were about ritual, about control, about reminding me where I stood. The conversation began the way it always did, with Vanessa. My father asked about her latest case, and she launched into a story about a high-profile client she was representing. My mother leaned forward, eyes shining, hanging on every word. I sat quietly, nodding when appropriate, sipping my wine to keep my hands from trembling. Inside, though, I was boiling. Every word about Vanessa's brilliance was another reminder of my invisibility. Every laugh, every nod of approval, every proud glance from my parents was a knife twisting deeper. I wanted to scream, "What about me? What about the nights I stayed up until 2 a.m. fixing spreadsheets for clients? What about the years I've spent paying your mortgage in silence?" But I didn't. I never did, until that night. It happened near the end of the meal. The plates were half empty, the wine glasses nearly drained. My mother set down her fork, folded her hands neatly on the table, and looked straight at me. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. "You're not even half the woman your sister is." The words landed like a slap. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and I felt the familiar sting of humiliation rising in my throat. Normally, I would have swallowed it. Normally, I would have smiled weakly, maybe excused myself to the bathroom to cry in silence. But something inside me snapped. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping against the floor with a sound so sharp it made everyone flinch. The room went silent. My mother's eyes widened. My father froze with his glass halfway to his lips, and Vanessa tilted her head, her smile faltering. I looked directly at my mother, then at Vanessa, and finally at my father. My voice was calm, almost icy, but it carried more weight than anything I had ever said at that table. "Then let her pay the rent for you." For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My father's face drained of color. He set his glass down slowly, his hand trembling. "Rent?" he stammered. "What rent?" I sat up straighter, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest, but my voice remained steady. "I mean the mortgage, the one you've been struggling with since Dad's business collapsed, the one I've been paying for the last 3 years." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa blinked, confusion flickering across her face. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. My father stared at me as if I had just spoken in another language. Finally, my mother found her voice. "Maddie, What are you talking about? I let out a bitter laugh. Don't act like you don't know. 3 years ago, you called me in tears, begging for help. You said the bank was going to take the house. You said it was just this once, and I believed you. But once became twice, then 3 times, until I set up automatic payments because it was easier than waiting for the next desperate phone call. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a bank statement I had brought with me, though I hadn't planned to use it. I laid it on the table, the numbers glaring up at us like an accusation. 36 transfers, over $70,000. That's what I've given you. That's what I've sacrificed. And not once did either of you say thank you. My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. My mother shook her head, her voice trembling. We never asked you to do that. You must be mistaken. If you chose to help, that was your decision. Don't bring it up now. Inappropriate, I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. For 3 years, I've been paying for this house. For 3 years, I've been giving up my own dreams so you could keep living here. And tonight, after everything I've done, you look me in the eye and tell me I'm not even half the woman my sister is? The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't say a word. She never did. I looked at her, then back at my parents. My voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried more power than any shout. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be invisible in your own family? To give everything you have and still be told it's not enough? I've been living in your shadow my entire life, and I'm done. My father's face hardened, his voice like flint. If you leave this house tonight, don't come back. The words hit me like a punch, but instead of breaking me, they set me free. I stood, my hands trembling, my heart racing, but my spine straighter than it had ever been. Then I won't, I said simply. I turned, walked out of the dining room, and left the house without looking back. The night air was cold against my skin, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The silence after my words was suffocating. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes when people are simply lost for words. It was heavier, denser, like the air itself had turned to stone. My father's face had gone pale, his lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes darting between me and the bank statement I had placed on the table. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass, though she didn't drink. Vanessa sat frozen, her perfect smile gone, her eyes wide with confusion, as if she had just realized she'd been living in a story with missing chapters. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I didn't stop. For years, I had swallowed my truth, buried it under polite smiles and quiet obedience. But now, with the words already out, there was no turning back. You want to know what rent I'm talking about? I said, my voice steady, though my hands shook. 3 years ago, after Dad's business collapsed, Mom called me in tears. She said the bank was going to take the house. She said you didn't have the money for the mortgage. I was sitting in my apartment, surrounded by client files, exhausted from another 12-hour day, and I listened to her beg me to help. And I did. I transferred the money the next morning. I told myself it was just once. Just one time to keep the roof over your heads. I paused, watching their faces. My mother's eyes flickered with something shame, maybe, or fear, but she quickly masked it. My father's jaw tightened. Vanessa shifted in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But it wasn't just once, I continued. The next month you called again, and the month after that, always with the same promise. Just this once, Maddie. Next month we'll manage on our own. And every time I believed you. Every time I told myself it was temporary. Until eventually, I set up automatic payments because it was easier than waiting for the next desperate phone call. I reached into my bag again and pulled out the folder I had carried with me for months, though I had never intended to show it. I spread the papers across the table, bank statements, transfer receipts, neatly organized by date, The numbers stared back at us, black ink on white paper, undeniable. 36 transfers, I said quietly. Over $70,000. That's what I've given you. That's what I've sacrificed. Do you know what that money was supposed to be? My down payment, my future, my chance to finally stop renting and buy a place of my own. But instead, it went here, to this house, to keep you safe, to keep you proud. And not once did either of you acknowledge it. My father finally spoke, his voice low and defensive. Maddie, we appreciate that you helped us once, but bringing it up like this at the dinner table, it's inappropriate. Inappropriate? I repeated, my voice rising. You think this is inappropriate? What's inappropriate is sitting here, listening to Mom tell me I'm not even half the woman my sister is, when I've been the one keeping this house from being taken by the bank. What's inappropriate is pretending my sacrifices never happened, as if I've been invisible all these years. My mother shook her head, her voice trembling. We never asked you to do that. You chose to help. Don't twist it into something else. I laughed bitterly. You never asked? Do you want me to read the messages? Maddie, please, just this once. Maddie, if not, the bank will take the house. Maddie, your father can't handle this right now. You begged me, and I gave in, every single time, because I thought family meant something, because I thought maybe, just maybe if I kept helping, you'd finally see me. You'd finally say, thank you, Maddie. We're proud of you too. But you never did. You never even tried. The room was unbearably still. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the sound of my own breathing. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice hesitant. Maddie, I didn't know. I turned to her, my eyes burning. Of course you didn't know, because they never told you, because in their story, you're the savior. You're the one they brag about. And me, I'm just the shadow, the quiet one, the one who doesn't need recognition, the one who will keep giving until there's nothing left. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of being caught. You're too sensitive, she whispered. We never thought you were less important. It's just that Vanessa's path is more visible. People notice her work. Yours is different. Different, I said, my voice breaking. You mean invisible. You mean disposable. You mean that no matter what I do, it will never be enough. Because I'm not her. Because I'll never be her. I looked down at the papers spread across the table, the evidence of 3 years of sacrifice. My hands trembled as I gathered them back into the folder. I understand now, I said softly. The problem was never money. The problem is that you will never see me. Not really. Not for who I am. Not for what I've done. And I'm done trying to make you. My father's face hardened, his voice sharp. If you walk out of this house tonight, don't come back. The words cut deep, but instead of breaking me, they solidified something inside me. I stood, clutching the folder to my chest, my heart pounding, but my spine straighter than it had ever been. Then I won't, I said. I turned and walked out, leaving them in silence. The night air hit me like a wave, cold and bracing. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. My hands were still shaking, my chest still tight, but beneath the pain there was something else, something new, a fragile sense of freedom. When I walked out of that dinner, folder clutched to my chest, I thought about every single month that had led me to that moment. 3 years, 36 transfers, $70,000. A number that had become both a lifeline for my parents and a chain around my own neck. It all started on a cold winter night 3 years earlier. I had just finished a long day at work, the kind where your eyes blur from staring at spreadsheets too long, and your body aches from sitting in the same chair for 12 hours. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, The one with the peeling paint on the bathroom ceiling and the heater that rattled like it was about to die. When my phone buzzed, it was my mother. She never called me that late. Her voice was trembling, almost broken. "Maddie, we might lose the house. Your father just lost a major contract. We don't have enough for the mortgage this month. If the bank doesn't get the payment, they'll send a notice. Please, sweetheart, can you help us? Just this once." I remember the way my chest tightened, the way my stomach dropped. That house wasn't just a building. It was the place where I grew up, where I had birthdays and Christmas mornings, where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway. The thought of it being taken away felt unbearable. And so, without hesitation, I said yes. The next morning, I transferred the money. I told myself it was temporary, a one-time thing. Families help each other in times of crisis. That's what I believed. But 1 month turned into 2. 2 turned into 3. Each time, the same promise. Just this once, Maddie. Next month we'll manage. And each time, I believed them. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that my sacrifice was buying them time to get back on their feet. Except they never did. By the 6th month, I had stopped waiting for the calls. I set up an automatic transfer because it was easier than hearing the desperation in my mother's voice or the shame in my father's. Every 15th of the month, like clockwork, a chunk of my paycheck disappeared, and with it, pieces of my life disappeared too. I stopped going out with friends. When they invited me on weekend trips, I said I was too busy, but the truth was I couldn't afford it. I canceled plans for graduate school because my savings account was shrinking instead of growing. I stayed in that cramped apartment even when the landlord raised the rent because I couldn't cover a new deposit. Every time I looked at my bank balance, I thought about the apartment I could have bought by now. The one bedroom with the balcony I had dreamed of, where I could drink coffee in the mornings and watch the city wake up. Instead, I was paying for a house I didn't live in, a house where I was treated like a guest, a house where my sister's achievements were celebrated while my sacrifices were erased. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the silence, the invisibility. Not once in those 3 years did my parents acknowledge what I was doing. Not once did they say, "Thank you." At family dinners, they would beam at Vanessa, praising her new house, her new job, her new car. And me? I was just Maddie. The quiet one. The reliable one. The one who would keep giving without being asked. I remember one night in particular. I was sitting at my desk, surrounded by stacks of financial reports, when my father called. His voice was rough, heavy with defeat. "Maddie, I hate to ask you again, but this month we really can't make it. If we lose the house, your mother will fall apart. Just this month, I promise." I stared out the window at the drizzle falling on the streetlights, feeling both pity and anger. Pity for the man who had once been so proud, now reduced to begging his daughter for help. Anger because once again, I had to put my own dreams on hold. And yet, almost by reflex, I said yes. That was the pattern. Month after month, year after year. Until the sacrifices became so normal that I almost forgot they were sacrifices at all. But deep down, I knew. I knew every time I said no to a trip with friends. Every time I skipped a new coat because the old one was good enough. Every time I told myself I didn't need a bigger apartment or a vacation or a break. I knew I was giving up pieces of myself. And the cruelest part? They never saw it. They never wanted to see it. To them, it was as if it had never happened. As if the money had simply appeared. As if the house had saved itself. I kept every receipt, every bank statement. I printed them out and filed them neatly in a folder, month by month, like a record of my own erasure. Sometimes, late at night, I would take them out and spread them across my dining table, staring at the numbers until my eyes blurred. $70,000. Enough for a down payment. Enough for a new life. Enough to prove that I wasn't invisible. But in my family's story, I didn't exist. And that was the hardest part of all. When people talk about sacrifice, they usually imagine something noble, something that earns respect. But the truth is, sacrifice in silence corrodes you. It eats away at your sense of self piece by piece until you start to forget who you were before you began giving everything away. Those 3 years weren't just about money leaving my account. They were about time I could never get back, opportunities I let slip through my fingers, and the quiet erosion of my identity. I remember the first time I said no to a trip with friends. They were planning a weekend getaway to the coast bonfires on the beach. Laughter, the kind of carefree memories people carry with them for years. I told them I had too much work, but the truth was, I had just sent off that month's mortgage payment for my parents. I couldn't afford the gas, the hotel, the meals. I sat alone in my apartment that weekend, scrolling through their photos on social media, smiling at their joy while swallowing the ache in my chest. Then there was the time I postponed applying for graduate school. I had been accepted into a part-time MBA program, something I had dreamed about since college. I even had the acceptance letter pinned to my fridge for weeks. But when I looked at the tuition costs and compared them to the steady drain of my monthly transfers, I knew it wasn't possible. I told myself, next year, maybe. But next year came, and the payments were still there. And the year after that. Until the dream faded into something I no longer dared to imagine. Even the small things added up. A new coat when winter came? Too expensive. A better apartment when my landlord raised the rent? Impossible. A vacation, even just a few days away? Out of the question. Every choice circled back to the same invisible obligation, keeping my parents' house standing. And the cruel irony was that no one ever knew. At family dinners, my parents would beam at Vanessa, praising her new car, her new house, her new promotion. And me? I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need recognition. They never once said, "Thank you, Maddie, for keeping this roof over our heads." They never once acknowledged that without me, the house they were so proud of would have been gone. I kept all the evidence, every transfer receipt, every text message from my mother begging for help, every late-night call from my father. I filed them neatly in a folder, month by month, as if I needed proof that I wasn't imagining it. Sometimes, late at night, I would spread the papers across my dining table, staring at the numbers until my eyes blurred. $70,000. Enough for a down payment. Enough for a new life. Enough to prove that I wasn't invisible. But in their story, I didn't exist. The weight of those years wasn't just financial. It was emotional. I began to feel like my entire identity was tied to those payments. Maddie, the dutiful daughter. Maddie, the one who sacrifices. Maddie, the one who doesn't complain. It became a role I played so well that I almost forgot it wasn't who I truly was. And yet, every time I thought about stopping, guilt consumed me. What if they lost the house? What if my mother broke down? What if my father's pride couldn't survive another failure? I told myself that family comes first, that I could rebuild my savings later, that my dreams could wait. But dreams don't wait forever. They wither when you starve them long enough. By the end of the 3rd year, I was exhausted. Not just tired from work, but tired in my soul. Tired of being invisible, tired of giving without receiving, tired of living in a story where my role was always the shadow. And yet, I kept going. Because that's what I had always done. Until the night my mother looked me in the eye and said, "You're not even half the woman your sister is." That was the moment the years of sacrifice crystallized into something undeniable. It wasn't just about money. It was about worth, about being seen, about finally realizing that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough for them. And that realization was both devastating and liberating. The silence after I laid the papers on the table was unbearable. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the hallway clock, even the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My parents stared at the documents as if they were written in a language they couldn't understand. Vanessa's eyes darted between us, her lips pressed tightly together, as though she wanted to speak but didn't dare. Finally, my father broke the silence. His voice was low, clipped, and defensive. "Maddie, we appreciate that you helped us once, but bringing it up like this, in front of everyone, is inappropriate." I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from humor. It was sharp, bitter, the kind of laugh that escapes when the truth is too heavy to hold inside any longer. Inappropriate? You think this is inappropriate? What's inappropriate is sitting here, listening to Mom tell me I'm not even half the woman my sister is, when I've been the one keeping this house from being taken by the bank. What's inappropriate is pretending my sacrifices never happened, as if I've been invisible all these years. My mother's face tightened, her brows furrowed. She shook her head quickly, as if she could erase my words by sheer force of denial. "We never asked you to do that," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You must be mistaken. If you chose to help, that was your decision. Don't twist it into something else." Her words hit me harder than I expected. "We never asked you." As if the late-night phone calls, the desperate text messages, the trembling voice on the other end of the line had been figments of my imagination. As if I had invented the whole thing. I leaned forward, my voice rising. "Never asked me? Do you want me to read them out loud? The messages you sent me at midnight, begging me to help? Maddie, please, just this once. Maddie, if not, the bank will take the house. Maddie, your father can't handle this right now." Do those sound like choices to you? Do those sound like something I dreamed up? My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked down at her plate, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her fork, though she wasn't eating. My father crossed his arms, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing as if he could intimidate me back into silence. "Maddie," he said, his voice sharp, "you're making a scene. We're grateful for what you did once or twice, but dragging it out like this, at the dinner table no less, is disrespectful." "Once or twice," I repeated, my voice breaking. I reached for the folder again, flipping through the pages, my fingers trembling as I pulled out statement after statement. 36 transfers, over $70,000. That's not once or twice. That's 3 years of my life. 3 years of my dreams slipping away while you sat here, week after week, praising Vanessa for buying a house, for getting a promotion, for living the life I could have had if I hadn't been paying for yours. Vanessa shifted in her seat, her face pale. She finally spoke, her voice quiet. I didn't know." I turned to her, my eyes burning. "Of course you didn't know, because they never told you. Because in their story, you're the savior. You're the one they brag about. And me? I'm just the shadow. The quiet one. The one who doesn't need recognition. The one who will keep giving until there's nothing left." My mother finally looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of being exposed. "You're too sensitive," she whispered. "We never thought you were less important. It's just that Vanessa's path is more visible. People notice her work. Yours is different." "Different," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You mean invisible. You mean disposable. You mean that no matter what I do, it will never be enough, because I'm not her, because I'll never be her." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My father's face hardened further, his voice like flint. "If you leave this house tonight, don't come back." For a moment the room seemed to tilt. The weight of his words pressed down on me, sharp and final, like a sentence being passed. But instead of breaking me, it solidified something inside me. I realized then that this was the truth I had been avoiding all along. No matter how much I gave, no matter how much I sacrificed, they would never see me. Not really. Not for who I was. Not for what I had done. I stood slowly, gathering the papers back into the folder, my hands trembling but my spine straighter than it had ever been. My voice was quiet, but it carried more power than any shout. "Then I won't. I turned and walked out, leaving them in silence. When I left my parents' house that night, the cold air hit me like a slap. My father's words, "If you leave this house tonight, don't come back," echoed in my head, sharp and final. For years, I had feared rejection, feared being cast out, feared losing the fragile thread that tied me to my family. But as I walked to my car, clutching the folder of bank statements against my chest, I realized something. I had already been living as an outsider. I had been invisible in that house long before my father said those words. The drive back to my apartment felt endless. The city lights blurred through my tears. Traffic lights changed without me noticing, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind replayed the dinner over and over. My mother's cold words, my father's denial, Vanessa's silence. And beneath it all, the same question pulsed in my chest. Why wasn't I ever enough? When I finally stepped into my apartment, the silence was overwhelming. No voices, no accusations, no comparisons. Just me, the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of rain against the window. I dropped my bag on the floor, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed into the chair by the dining table. My hands were still trembling as I opened my laptop. I don't know what compelled me to do it. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the desperate need to reclaim something that had been stolen from me. But I logged into my bank account, navigated to the scheduled transfers section, and stared at the line of automatic payments I had set up 3 years ago. Every 15th of the month, without fail, a sum of money left my account and went straight into theirs. It was so routine, so mechanical, that I had almost stopped noticing it. But now, staring at the screen, I felt the weight of every dollar, every sacrifice, every dream deferred. My cursor hovered over the cancel button. My chest tightened. My breath caught. For 3 years, these payments had defined me. Maddie, the dutiful daughter. Maddie, the one who sacrificed. Maddie, the one who kept the family afloat. If I canceled them, who would I be? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and clicked. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to stop this automatic payment? I pressed yes. The screen refreshed, and just like that, the chain was broken. The first feeling that hit me was pain. It felt like I had cut off a piece of myself, like I had betrayed the role I had carried for so long. My throat tightened, my eyes burned, and for a moment I thought I might collapse under the weight of it. But then, slowly, another feeling crept in. Relief. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't tied to their survival. For the first time, my paycheck would be mine. For the first time, I could imagine a future that belonged to me. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still shaking, but there was a strange lightness in my chest. I went back to the table, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folder I had kept all this time. Inside were the printed bank statements, neatly arranged by month, from that winter night 3 years ago up to the most recent one. I spread them across the table, the black and white sheets covering the surface like a mosaic of sacrifice. The numbers stared back at me. 500, 1,000, 2,500, even 2,000 some months. I added them up, pencil marks crisscrossing the page, until the total glared at me, $72,000. Money that should have been the down payment for my own apartment. Money that should have been vacations, graduate school, a better life. Money that had instead vanished into a house where I was treated like a shadow. My chest tightened, my eyes filled with tears, and I whispered to myself, why did I let this go so far? But as the tears fell, something shifted. Beneath the grief, beneath the anger, there was clarity. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't get back the years I had lost, the dreams I had postponed, the recognition I had never received. But I could change what came next. I looked at the papers spread across the table, and for the first time, I didn't see them as proof of my invisibility. I saw them as proof of my strength, proof that I had carried a burden no one else could have carried, proof that I had survived. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't play music. I sat in the silence of my apartment, the warm yellow light spilling over the scattered statements, and I let myself feel everything: the pain, the loss, the relief, the fragile hope. And when I finally lay down in bed, I knew something had shifted inside me. The loop I had been trapped in, work, send money, sacrifice, silence, was broken. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken back control of my life. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of lightness. The world outside hadn't changed. The same gray sky, the same drizzle, the same city streets. But inside, something was different. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was free. I put on my workout clothes and went for a run along the river. The air was crisp, the mist still hanging low over the water, and each footfall felt like shedding another layer of the weight I had carried for so long. I started slow, then picked up the pace, my breath coming harder, my chest burning, but it wasn't the burn of exhaustion. It was the burn of release. For the first time, I was running for myself. Not to catch up to Vanessa's shadow, not to meet my parents' expectations, not to prove my worth, just for me. And that was the turning point. When I pressed yes and canceled the automatic transfers, the screen blinked once and refreshed. That was it. 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of silent obedience, 3 years of being tethered to my parents' survival, gone with a single click. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands trembling, my chest tight. It felt surreal. For so long, those payments had been part of my identity. They had defined me. Maddie, the reliable one. Maddie, the one who always said yes. Maddie, the one who gave without asking for anything in return. And now, with one decision, I had severed that identity. The first wave that hit me was guilt. A crushing, suffocating guilt that made me want to undo what I had just done. My mind raced with questions. What if they can't make the payment this month? What if they lose the house? What if my mother breaks down? What if my father's pride shatters completely? For years, I had carried the belief that their survival depended on me, that without me, everything would collapse. But then another thought crept in, quiet but insistent. What about me? What about the nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering why I was never enough? What about the vacations I never took, the education I postponed, the apartment I never bought? What about the years of my life that had slipped away while I was busy saving theirs? I looked at the folder of bank statements spread across the table. Each page was a reminder of what I had lost. But as I stared at them, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't just see loss. I saw proof. Proof that I had been strong enough to carry them for 3 years. Proof that I had given more than anyone could have asked. Proof that I had done my part, and more. And if they couldn't see that, if they refused to acknowledge it, then maybe the problem wasn't me. Maybe it never had been. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let out a long, shaky breath. The guilt was still there, but it was softer now, mingled with something else. Relief. It was like cutting a cord I hadn't realized was strangling me. For 3 years, I had lived in a loop. Work. Send money. Sacrifice. Silence. That loop had become so familiar that I thought it was permanent. But now, for the first time, I could see a way out. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I thought about the apartment I had dreamed of buying, the one with the balcony overlooking the city. I thought about the graduate program I had postponed, the trips I had canceled, the life I had put on hold. And for the first time in years, those dreams didn't feel impossible. They felt within reach. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of lightness. The world outside was the same. Gray skies, drizzle on the windows, the hum of traffic. But inside, Something had changed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was free. I put on my running shoes and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the mist still hanging low over the river, and as I started to run, I felt layers of weight peeling off me with every step. My breath came hard, my chest burned, but it wasn't the burn of exhaustion. It was the burn of release. For the first time, I was running for myself. Not to catch up to Vanessa's shadow, not to meet my parents' expectations, not to prove my worth. Just for me. When I got back to my apartment, sweaty and breathless, I stood by the window and looked out at the city. The buildings, the streets, the people rushing to work. It all looked different, brighter somehow. And I realized something. I had been living in survival mode for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to imagine a future. That day, I made a promise to myself. No more living in the shadows. No more sacrificing my dreams for people who refused to see me. No more silence. It wouldn't be easy. I knew that. The guilt would come back. The doubts would creep in. My parents would probably call, demand explanations, try to pull me back into the role I had always played. But I also knew this. I had taken the first step. And once you take that step, there's no going back. That night, I sat at my dining table again, the folder of bank statements still spread out in front of me. I picked up a pen and wrote one sentence across the top page. This ends here. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The morning after I canceled the payments, I woke up to a silence that felt different. For years, silence had been heavy, suffocating. The silence of being unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. But now it felt lighter, almost like a blank canvas. For the first time in years, I wasn't waking up to the weight of obligation. I wasn't calculating how much of my paycheck would vanish into someone else's mortgage. I wasn't bracing myself for another desperate phone call. I was free. Of course, freedom didn't come without fear. That first week, I kept waiting for the phone to ring. I imagined my mother's voice, sharp and trembling, demanding to know why the payment hadn't gone through. I imagined my father's anger, his disappointment, his cold silence. But the call never came, and with each day that passed, the knot in my stomach loosened a little more. I decided I couldn't just sit in my apartment, staring at the walls, waiting for guilt to consume me. I needed to fill the space that had opened up inside me with something new, something that belonged only to me. So I started small. On Thursday evenings, I signed up for a cooking class at the community center. It felt strange at first, walking into that bright kitchen filled with strangers, young mothers learning new recipes, middle-aged men hoping to surprise their wives, international students far from home. No one there knew me as the lesser daughter. No one compared me to Vanessa. They only saw me as Maddie, a woman who loved experimenting with flavors, who laughed when her bread burned, who clapped when someone finally mastered a tart. For the first time in years, I felt joy in something simple. I wasn't doing it to prove myself. I wasn't doing it to earn approval. I was doing it because it made me happy. Then came the weekends. Instead of dragging myself to my parents' house for dinner, I started joining a group of friends who went hiking around Mount Hood. The first time I stood at the summit looking down at the endless stretch of green pine forest, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Awe. The air was crisp, the sky wide open, and for once I wasn't weighed down by invisible chains. I wasn't Maddie the provider, Maddie the shadow, Maddie the disappointment. I was just Maddie, strong, capable, free. Evenings at home changed too. Instead of opening my laptop to worry over spreadsheets or check my dwindling balance, I opened books I had been meaning to read for years. I brewed tea, curled up on my couch, and let myself enjoy the silence. A silence that was no longer tied to sacrifice, but to peace. And something unexpected happened at work. With the weight of my family's burden lifted, I found myself with more energy, more focus. I took on tougher projects, Stayed late not because I had to, but because I wanted to. One evening, my director walked by, saw me bent over a financial analysis, and paused. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "I like your dedication, Maddie. This company needs more people like you." That short compliment meant more to me than all the empty praise my parents had ever given Vanessa. Because it was real. It was earned. It was mine. A month later, I was promoted to team lead for a new project. Standing in front of the conference room, presenting my financial plan to the board, my heart raced. But not from fear. From pride. When the room erupted in applause, when my boss nodded in approval, I walked out with my feet barely touching the ground. For the first time, I wasn't a shadow. I was standing in my own light. But the biggest change wasn't in my job, or my hobbies, or even my friendships. It was inside me. I started to see myself differently. For years, I had defined myself by what I gave up, by how much I sacrificed, by how invisible I could make myself to keep the peace. But now I was learning to define myself by what I created, by what I enjoyed, by what I wanted. I wasn't just the daughter who paid the bills. I wasn't just the sister who lived in the shadows. I was Maddie, a woman who loved cooking, who found peace in hiking, who thrived at work, who laughed with friends, who dreamed of a future that belonged only to her. And slowly, the guilt began to fade. Yes, I had stopped the payments. Yes, my parents might struggle without me. But I realized something important. Their survival was never supposed to be my responsibility. I had carried them for 3 years, and they had chosen not to see it. That was their choice. My choice now was to live. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights flicker. For the first time in years, I felt complete. Not because anyone had praised me, not because I had sacrificed enough to earn love, but because I had finally chosen myself. And that was the beginning of everything. It's strange how quickly life can shift once you stop carrying a weight that was never yours to bear. For 3 years, I had been tethered to my parents' survival, my identity wrapped around sacrifice. But once I cut that cord, it was as if the universe had been waiting for me to make space. And into that space, new possibilities began to pour. It started at work. With the burden of those monthly transfers gone, I found myself with more energy than I had felt in years. I wasn't dragging myself through each day, calculating how much I could spare, worrying about whether my parents would call again. Instead, I threw myself into my projects with a clarity I hadn't known before. I stayed late at the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I took on the toughest clients, the most complicated financial analyses, the projects no one else wanted to touch. And for the first time, I wasn't doing it to prove myself to anyone else. I was doing it because I loved it, because numbers made sense in a way people never had, because in spreadsheets and forecasts, there were no comparisons, no shadows, only truth. One evening, as I was finishing up a report, my director walked by. He paused, watching me work, then said, "Maddie, I like your dedication. This company needs more people like you." It was such a simple sentence, but it hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had been starving for recognition, for someone to see me. And here it was, not from my parents, not from my sister, but from someone who valued me for what I actually did. That moment lit something inside me. A month later, I was promoted to lead a new project team. Standing in front of the conference room, presenting my financial plan to the board, I felt my heart race, but not from fear, from pride. When the room erupted in applause, when my boss nodded in approval, I walked out with my feet barely touching the ground. For the first time, I wasn't a shadow. I was standing in my own light. And then came the email. It was from a fintech startup in Seattle, one of the fastest growing in the region. They had seen my work, heard about my leadership, and wanted me to join as their director of financial analysis. The salary was more than 40 higher than what I was making, There were stock options, growth opportunities, a chance to build something from the ground up. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the email, my heart pounding. Moving would mean leaving Portland, the city that had shaped my adult years. It would mean leaving behind the apartment where I had cried, sacrificed, and finally freed myself. But it would also mean stepping into a future that was mine. I called my closest friend, my voice trembling as I read the offer aloud. She screamed with joy. "Maddie, you have to take it. This is the new beginning you deserve." Her words echoed in my chest. A new beginning. That's exactly what it felt like. I opened my laptop, typed 4 words, and hit send. I accept the offer. Those 4 words freed me more than anything else ever had. The weeks leading up to my move were a blur of packing, goodbyes, and quiet reflection. I walked through Portland with new eyes, visiting the little cafe under the Burnside Bridge where I had spent countless afternoons, the bookstore where I had hidden in the aisles when life felt too heavy, the riverfront where I had run that first morning after canceling the payments. The city had witnessed my years of sacrifice, but now it was also witnessing me, stepping into my own worth. When I arrived in Seattle, everything felt bigger, faster, sharper. The startup world was demanding, exhilarating, relentless. I worked alongside brilliant, creative minds who didn't care who I was related to, who didn't measure me against anyone else. They only cared about the value I brought, and in that environment, I thrived. My salary was higher, my shares grew more valuable, and for the first time, my savings account climbed instead of shrank. One evening, sitting on the balcony of my rented apartment, I opened my personal spreadsheet, added up the numbers, and realized I finally had enough for a down payment. My heart raced. For years, that dream had felt impossible, slipping further away with every transfer I made to my parents. But now it was within reach. I met with a real estate agent that weekend. We toured apartments across the city, some spacious but dark, others bright but too far from the center. I didn't want to rush. I had waited too long, sacrificed too much. I needed a place that felt like mine the moment I walked in. And then we stepped into a unit on the 16th floor of a newly built tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows open to a sweeping view of Seattle, with the Space Needle rising proudly against the sky. The apartment wasn't large, just 1 bedroom, a compact kitchen, polished wooden floors, but sunlight poured into every corner. I stepped onto the balcony, the cool breeze brushing my face, and I knew. This was it. The process of buying the apartment took weeks, but with each passing day, my excitement grew. When I finally signed the contract, my hands trembled, not with fear, but with joy. The keys felt cold and solid in my palm, sweeter than anything I had ever touched. On the first day, I walked into the empty apartment, dropped my bag on the floor, and stood in the middle of the living room. No furniture, no noise, just open space and a view of the city. I took a deep breath, and inside me, a single thought rang clear. For the first time, everything is mine. Not thanks to anyone else, not bought at the cost of silent sacrifices, but entirely through my own effort. I decorated slowly, carefully. A light gray sofa, a small oak dining table, a tall bookshelf filled with my favorite books and a few green plants. On the wall, I hung a painting of Portland, not as a wound, but as a reminder of where I had come from, of the chains I had broken. Every item I chose reflected me. Not my parents, not Vanessa. Me. At night, I would stand on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker and feel a peace I had never known before. I wasn't Maddie the Shadow anymore. I wasn't Maddie the Sacrifice. I was Maddie, the woman who had dared to cut ties, who had built her own life, who now stood in her own home, watching the city shine. And that was the new stage of my life. 6 months after moving to Seattle, I thought I had finally closed the chapter on my family's shadow. My new job at the fintech startup was demanding but exhilarating. My savings were growing, my apartment was mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing in my own light. I had built something that belonged entirely to me. And then the phone rang. It was Mrs. Jensen, the elderly neighbor who had lived across from my parents for as long as I could remember. Her voice was cheerful, but there was a hesitation in it that made my stomach tighten. "Maddie, dear, how have you been? I just walked past your parents' house and saw something I thought you should know. They've hung a banner outside. Quite something, really. Let me send you a picture." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a message. I opened it and my breath caught in my throat. There it was, stretched across the familiar porch of the house I had saved month after month. A wide white banner with bold red letters. "Congratulations, Vanessa, for preserving the family home." I stared at the words until my vision blurred. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Preserving the family home. As if I had never existed. As if the 3 years of transfers, the $72,000, the nights I cried over my dwindling savings, had never happened. In their story, Vanessa was the savior. And me? I was erased. The numbness spread quickly, but it didn't stay numb for long. It turned into heat, into fire, into a rage so sharp it made my whole body tremble. They hadn't just ignored me. They had rewritten history. They had taken my sacrifices, buried them, and handed the glory to my sister. I closed my eyes, and memories flooded back. My mother's trembling voice on the phone, begging me to help. My father's rough, defeated tone, promising it was just this month. The nights I said no to friends, no to vacations, no to myself because I had to send the money. The folder of bank statements spread across my table, the proof of everything I had given. And now, a banner. A lie. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't the helpless tears I had shed so many times before. These were different. These were tears of fury, of betrayal, of resolve. I couldn't let them bury the truth. That night, I pulled out the folder I had kept all along. Every transfer receipt, every bank statement, every desperate message from my mother. I spread them across my dining table, the evidence of 3 years of sacrifice. I opened my laptop and compiled everything into a report, neat, undeniable, complete with charts showing every payment. I even printed out the texts. "Maddie, please, just this once. Maddie, if not, the bank will take the house." By the time I was done, the picture was unmistakable. Without me, that house would have been gone long ago. I leaned back in my chair, my chest heaving, my hands trembling. I knew what I had to do. The following weekend, I drove back to Portland. The closer I got to my parents' house, the heavier the air felt. When I pulled up, the banner was still there, flapping proudly in the wind. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to breathe. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. My parents sat at the dining table, Vanessa beside them, her expression unreadable. My mother's eyes flicked to the folder in my hands, and I saw a flicker of fear. I set the folder down on the table and opened it, spreading the papers out one by one. $72,000, I said quietly. That's what I gave you. That's what kept this house standing. And yet, you hang a banner giving the credit to Vanessa. My father's face hardened. "Maddie, this isn't the time." "No," I cut him off, my voice sharp. "This is exactly the time. You've erased me for the last time. You've taken my sacrifices, buried them, and handed the glory to someone who didn't give a single cent. Do you have any idea how cruel that is?" My mother's lips trembled. "We didn't mean—" "You didn't mean," I snapped. "You didn't mean to erase me. You didn't mean to pretend I never existed. You didn't mean to hang a banner that turned my 3 years of sacrifice into Vanessa's triumph." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to the papers. For once, she didn't look triumphant. She looked small. "I didn't know," she whispered. I turned to her, my voice steady. "Of course you didn't, because they never told you. Because in their story, you're the hero. And me, I'm the shadow. But not anymore." I gathered the papers back into the folder, my hands firm, my spine straight. "I'm done being invisible. I'm done being erased. You can hang all the banners you want, but the truth is right here, and I will never let you bury it again." The room was silent. My father's face was stone, my mother's eyes filled with tears, Vanessa staring at the table. But I didn't wait for their response. I didn't need it. I stood, picked up the folder, and walked out. As I stepped into the sunlight, the banner still flapping above the porch, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. They could rewrite their story all they wanted. But I had my own story now. And in mine, I wasn't a shadow. I was the woman who had dared to speak, to walk away, to build a life of her own. And that was enough.